Hello guys and welcome back. In this video I wanted to talk about the Houdini structure compared to other applications, for instance Maya and 3ds Max. And on the right here is a graph of a hypergraph of a Maya scene, and you can see it's very hard to read. It's very hard to see the inputs and what's happening to the data, but it's basically procedural rigging with some geometry, subdivision, extrusion, and things like that. And at this point, it's almost impossible to go in and add a new operation or changes in between the data. Let's say you wanted to add a new subdivision in this chain here. It's almost impossible to do that. And then if the input changes, if the character or the geometry changes, everything here needs to be recreated, or you have to write a lot of tools to update the graph. Now in Houdini we don't have the data is structured in a much more useful way. And so in this example we have a starting point in input geometry, and you can see the data is flowing clearly. You can see how it's being reused. So we have a grid here and it's been run through a poly extrude, and then that data is being reused in multiple ways and combined together. And this is one of the main advantage of proceduralism in Houdini. In Maya or 3ds Max, if you have a sphere and you wanted to make a copy of that sphere, apply subdivision to it, and take another copy of that sphere and apply an extrusion, you cannot have all that being applied or coming from a single input geometry. You need to make copies of that sphere and then process it in different ways. Well, in Houdini you don't have to. You can take any data at any point in time of the any place in the graph and process it in many different ways. So let's say I have a grid, I can run a subdivision, and I can run a another extrusion on that grid. I can run a deletion process, and all this is happening to the same input geometry. So if my mesh changes, all that will still be applied. With with Maya or 3ds Max, you have this huge problem where if you wanted to process your input in many different ways, you cannot do that. You always have to make copies. And then about the structure of the graph, so I have 3ds Max here. You can see it's very, this is 3ds Max on the left, Maya has the outliner, and it's only hierarchical structure. You have to have a hierarchy to access the data, which is very limited if you want to share data between various parts of the graph, and it's impossible to do so in packages like 3ds Max or Maya. And this is where Houdini pretty much has the biggest advantages. You can reuse the data and swap the inputs or any parts of the chain freely, while on the other apps, like pretty much every single non-procedural app has this limitation of you're locked to the input geometry. Once you let's say you take a character and you start modifying its mesh, it's locked to that character. You cannot change it anymore. In Houdini it's much more flexible. You can reuse the data. You can see here we have a single input geometry. It's been processed in many ways and then combined at the end, and we're going to learn how to create this from scratch. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.